Ma'am, I gave you a lawful order. Stand up. ID. Now.
This is a public park. We are committing no crime. You have no legal basis to detain us.
You don't need to lecture me. You're acting suspicious. Turn around. Officer, please. She's done nothing wrong. Back up. Both of you. Hands where I can see them. Stop.
Willow Creek Park is the jewel of Oak Ridge. It sits adjacent to the wealthier subdivision of the city, a sprawling expanse of manicured emerald grass, weeping willows dipping their branches into a slow-moving stream and stone walking paths that circle a central pond. It is public property maintained by city taxes, open to anyone who wishes to enjoy the sunlight. It was 1:15 p.m. The sky was a piercing blue, clear and bright. The temperature was a perfect 72 degrees. Judge Eleanor Mathis had served on the federal bench for 12 years. Her career was a testament to iron discipline and intellectual rigor. She had spent a decade as a federal prosecutor putting away organized crime figures and dismantling trafficking rings before being appointed as a magistrate judge. She was known in the Western District for her piercing intellect, her encyclopedic knowledge of constitutional law, and a temperament that was calm, fair, but utterly unyielding when it came to the rules of her court. She was a woman who commanded respect not by raising her voice, but by lowering it. That Thursday was her 30th wedding anniversary. She had taken a rare afternoon off. Her husband, Dr. Marcus Mathis, had cleared his surgery schedule. Marcus was a man of quiet strength, a surgeon whose hands had saved thousands of lives, a man who had navigated the complexities of race and medicine in America for 40 years with grace and dignity. They had decided to keep it simple. They packed a basket with sparkling water, artisanal cheese, fresh fruit, and sandwiches from their favorite deli. They drove to Willow Creek, found a shaded spot under a massive oak tree near the water, and spread out a blanket. They looked like exactly what they were, an affluent, successful older couple enjoying a quiet milestone in their marriage. Eleanor wore a linen sundress and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her eyes. Marcus was in polo shirt and pressed khakis. They were laughing softly, reminiscing about their honeymoon in Charleston 3 decades prior. They weren't playing loud music. They weren't shouting. They were eating grapes and holding hands. But in the eyes of Officer Kyle Vance and the woman who called him, they were something else entirely. They were an anomaly. They were out of place. And for an officer like Vance, who viewed the world through a lens of suspicion rather than service, out of place was enough to justify a confrontation. He didn't see a judge and a surgeon. He saw targets. To understand why Officer Vance arrived at the park with his mind already made up, we have to look at the call that set these events in motion. The caller was Brenda Halloway, a 52-year-old resident of the Willow Creek subdivision. Brenda was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a position she wielded with the enthusiasm of a feudal lord. She spent her days monitoring the streets from her front bay window phone in hand, ready to report anything that didn't align with her vision of the community. From her vantage point across the street from the park entrance, Brenda saw the Mathises pull up in their luxury sedan. She watched them unload their picnic basket. She watched them walk to the shade of the oak tree. There was no crime being committed. There was no disturbance. But Brenda felt a distinct sense of territorial anxiety. In her mind, the park was an extension of her subdivision intended for residents. While the park was technically public, the locals treated it as their private backyard. And she didn't recognize Eleanor and Marcus. She watched them for 10 minutes, her irritation growing. They looked too comfortable. They were taking up the best spot near the water. Why were they here? Why weren't they at work? Brenda picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency police line, a number she had saved in her favorites. Oak Ridge Police Dispatcher Miller? Yes, this is Brenda Halloway. I'm calling to report suspicious activity at Willow Creek Park. The dispatcher, who knew Brenda's voice well from dozens of prior frivolous calls, sighed audibly. What is the nature of the suspicious activity, Ms. Halloway? There are 2 people, a man and a woman, loitering in the park. They don't live here. I know everyone who lives here. They've been sitting on the grass for 20 minutes, just watching the houses. Are they threatening anyone? Are they causing a disturbance? They are making me feel unsafe, Brenda insisted, her voice tightening. They are loitering, and I think they might be casing the homes across the street. They're just sitting there. It's the middle of the workday. Decent people are at work. I want an officer to come check them out. We have a no trespassing policy for non-residents after dusk, and they look like they're settling in. It's 100 p.m., Ms. Holloway. The park is open to the public during the day. Well, I want them checked, Brenda snapped. They don't belong here. Send someone now. The call was logged. The dispatcher coded it as a suspicious person, check subject call, but included notes. Caller is regular complainant Holloway. Subjects described as picnicking. When the call came over the radio, Officer Kyle Vance was 2 miles away, sitting in his cruiser, bored. He read the dispatch notes on his computer terminal. Suspicious persons, loitering, casing homes. He ignored the part about the caller being a known nuisance. He ignored the time of day. His mind latched onto the narrative that offered the most excitement potential burglars scouting a wealthy neighborhood. Vance had a history that should have precluded him from wearing a badge. In his 6 years, he had accumulated 14 internal complaints. Most were for rudeness, 2 for unauthorized searches, and 3 for bias-based profiling. He was known in the department as a hothead, an officer who escalated calm situations into chaos because he perceived any question as a challenge to his manhood. His supervisors had written him up, sent him to sensitivity training seminars, which he slept through, and warned him to tone it down. But the union protected him, and the culture of the department tolerated him because he wrote a lot of tickets and made arrest quotas. Vance threw his cruiser into gear and sped toward Willow Creek Park. He wasn't going there to investigate. He was going there to evict. He had already decided the outcome before he even saw the subjects. In his mind, he was the thin blue line protecting the good citizens of Willow Creek from the suspicious outsiders. Do you think officers should have access to the history of the 911 caller before they arrive on scene? Let us know in the comments below. Officer Vance pulled his patrol unit up to the curb of Willow Creek Park at 1:28 p.m. He didn't park in a designated spot. He pulled partially onto the grass, a power move designed to intimidate. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt, checking the fit of his sunglasses. He was a large man, bulky from hours at the gym, carrying himself with a stiff, coiled aggression. He scanned the park. It was mostly empty, save for a young woman reading on a bench far away and the couple under the oak tree. Eleanor and Marcus Mathis. Vance began his approach. He didn't walk with the casual open gait of a community peace officer. He marched. His hand rested near his holster, not on it but close enough to send a message. As he got closer, he saw the expensive picnic basket, the sparkling water, the hardbound books. He saw a man in a crisp polo and a woman in a designer dress. But confirmation bias is a powerful blinder. Vance didn't see a wealthy couple. He saw 2 people trying to look innocent, which in his twisted logic made them guilty. Marcus noticed the officer first. He tapped Eleanor's hand gently. Ellie, we have company. Eleanor looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. She saw the officer looming over them. She remained seated, her posture relaxed but attentive. She had spent a lifetime in courtrooms. She knew how to read body language, and Officer Vance was screaming hostility. Vance stopped 5 feet from their blanket. He didn't say, "Good afternoon." He didn't ask, "How are you folks doing? You 2 live around here?" Vance barked, his voice loud enough to carry across the water. Eleanor took a sip of her water, deliberately slow before setting the glass down. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" "I asked you a question," Vance said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over their food. "Do you live in this neighborhood? Let me see some ID." Marcus began to reach for his wallet, a reflex born of survival, but Eleanor placed a hand on his arm to stop him. She looked at Vance with the cool, analytical gaze that had withered defense attorneys for a decade. "Officer," Eleanor said, her voice steady and clear, "we are enjoying a private lunch in a public park. We are not committing any crime. We are not creating a disturbance. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that we have committed, are committing, or are about to commit a crime, we are not required to identify ourselves." Vance's face flushed. In his 6 years on the street, he wasn't used to people quoting the law back to him. He was used to fear. He was used to submission. This woman sitting on the ground looking up at him was speaking to him like he was a first-year law student who had failed an exam. "I got a call about suspicious activity." Vance lied, inflating the nature of the complaint. "Loitering. Casing houses. Now this park is for residents. If you don't live here, you're trespassing. So I'm going to ask you one more time. ID. Now." "That is incorrect," Eleanor stated. "This is Willow Creek Park. It is municipal property maintained by the Oak Ridge Department of Parks and Recreation. It is open to the public from sunrise to sunset. There is no residency requirement. As for loitering, having a picnic is not loitering. It is the intended use of this space." Vance's jaw tightened. He felt his control slipping. The logic didn't matter to him. The law didn't matter. What mattered was that a black woman was telling him no. "Listen to me." Vance stepped onto the corner of their blanket, his muddy boot soiling the fabric. "I don't care what you think you know. When I ask for ID, you give it to me. You're acting suspicious. Refusing to identify is obstruction. Now stand up, both of you." Marcus looked at the officer, his concern growing. "Officer, look, we're just celebrating our anniversary. My name is Dr. Mathis. This is my wife. We aren't trying to cause any trouble." "I didn't ask for your life story," Vance snapped, pointing a finger in Marcus's face. "I said stand up. Get your hands out of your pockets." The situation had shifted from an annoyance to a constitutional crisis in the span of 90 seconds. Eleanor Mathis realized that reason was not going to penetrate Officer Vance's armor of aggression. She had seen officers like this in her courtroom, men who escalated encounters because they lacked the emotional intelligence to de-escalate them. But she also knew that as a black woman in America, even with her title, she was in a precarious position. She stood up slowly, dusting off her dress. She signaled for Marcus to do the same. She moved with a deliberate, regal slowness that seemed to infuriate Vance even more. "Officer," Eleanor said, standing at her full height. She was 5'7", but she projected the authority of a giant. "You are making a significant mistake. I am going to reach into my purse now. I am going to retrieve my credentials. I strongly suggest you look at them before you take this any further." "Don't reach for anything," Vance yelled, his hand dropping to his holster, unsnapping the retention strap. "Turn around. Turn around now." "I am not turning around," Eleanor said, her voice hardening. "I am telling you that I am a federal judge. My husband is a surgeon. You are harassing us based on a bias-motivated call. You have no probable cause." "Federal judge?" Vance scoffed. He laughed, a short, cruel sound. "Yeah, right. And I'm the director of the FBI. You think I haven't heard every lie in the book? You people always have some story." "You people." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. By now, the commotion had drawn attention. 2 joggers had stopped on the path. A man walking his dog had paused and pulled out his phone. The camera was rolling. Vance didn't care. In his mind, the camera was just recording his righteous enforcement of the law against disorderly subjects. "I am giving you a lawful order," Vance shouted, stepping into Eleanor's personal space. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for trespassing, failure to identify, and resisting an officer." "I am not resisting," Eleanor said, ensuring her voice was loud enough for the witnesses to hear. "I am questioning the legality of your order. There is no trespass. There is no crime. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "That's it," Vance growled. He didn't wait for compliance. He grabbed Eleanor's arm. He didn't use the gentle guide of a professional. He used the rough, wrenching grip of a brawler. He spun her around with enough force that she stumbled. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, stepping forward. "Get your hands off her. She has arthritis in her shoulder." Vance shoved Marcus back with his free hand hard enough to send the older man staggering against the tree trunk. "Back up, or you're next, old man. Back up. Do not touch my husband." Eleanor cried out, the pain in her shoulder shooting down her arm. "Officer, you are assaulting a federal magistrate. Stop this now." "Stop fighting." Vance yelled, playing to the imaginary audience that would justify his report. He yanked Eleanor's arms behind her back, twisting her wrists upward. The pain was sharp and immediate. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. Click, click. The sound of the ratchets tightening was sickeningly loud in the quiet park. Eleanor Mathis, a woman who had signed warrants for the FBI, who had sentenced international drug lords, who was one of the most respected legal minds in the state, was now handcuffed like a common criminal in the middle of a picnic. Vance wasn't finished. He turned to Marcus. "You too. You want to intervene? You're going for obstruction." "I am not intervening," Marcus said. His hands raised, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am watching you assault my wife. I am a doctor. You are hurting her. Turn around!" Vance grabbed Marcus, spinning him and slamming him against the tree. He cuffed the surgeon quickly, roughly. There they stood, a surgeon and a judge, handcuffed, humiliated, their anniversary lunch trampled in the dirt. "You have destroyed your career," Eleanor said quietly, her back to Vance. She wasn't shouting anymore. Her voice had dropped to a terrified calm. "You have no idea what you have just done." "Shut up," Vance said, breathing heavy, the adrenaline of the bully coursing through him. "Get moving, to the car." The walk to the patrol car was a procession of shame, but not for the couple. It was a shame that belonged to the officer, though he was too blinded by his own ego to feel it yet. The witnesses were filming. A woman shouted from the path, "They didn't do anything. They were just eating lunch." Vance ignored her. He shoved Eleanor into the back seat of the cruiser. It was a tight plastic cage. The heat was stifling. He shoved Marcus in the other side. They sat squeezed together, hands bound behind their backs, their shoulders touching. "Are you okay?" Marcus whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your shoulder. It hurts," Eleanor admitted, wincing. "But I'm more worried about him. He's dangerous." Vance got into the front seat. He didn't check on their comfort. He didn't buckle them in. He started the car and peeled away from the curb, driving fast, aggressive. "You folks think you can just come into a nice neighborhood and do whatever you want." Vance lectured them from the front seat, watching them in the rearview mirror. "Think you can talk back to police? Think the rules don't apply to you? Maybe where you come from that works, but not in Oak Ridge. We have order here." "I live 4 miles from here," Marcus said calmly. "In the Highlands." "Sure you do," Vance sneered. "And I live in a castle. You know, if you'd just been humble, if you'd just shown me some ID and moved along when I told you to, none of this would have happened. You brought this on yourselves. It's about respect. You have to respect authority." Eleanor stared at the back of his head. She was memorizing everything. The time, the route, his badge number 492, his name tag Vance. Every word he spoke was another nail in the coffin of his career. She didn't argue with him anymore. There is no point in arguing with a storm. You just document the damage. "Officer," Eleanor said, "I am requesting that you contact your supervisor immediately upon arrival." "You'll see the sergeant when I'm done processing you," Vance said. "You're going to sit in a holding cell and think about your attitude. Maybe I'll let you go with a citation in a few hours if you apologize." He actually believed that. He believed he was going to teach them a lesson, write them a ticket for trespassing, and send them on their way. He had done it before to teenagers, to construction workers, to people he deemed lesser. He had no concept of the storm that was gathering over his head. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. When they pulled into the sally port, the garage door rumbling shut behind them, the atmosphere changed. The precinct was a place of procedure. Cameras were everywhere. Vance hauled them out of the car. He marched them through the heavy steel doors into the intake area. The desk sergeant on duty was Thomas Miller. He was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran who was counting the days to retirement. He was a good cop, a man who knew the community, who knew the players. He was sipping coffee and reviewing a shift log when Vance walked in with his 2 prisoners. Miller looked up. He saw Officer Vance flushed and looking triumphant. Then he looked at the prisoners. He saw a man in a polo shirt looking dignified but furious. He saw a woman in a linen dress, her hat missing her hair slightly mussed, but her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. Miller's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He squinted. He recognized the woman. He had seen her picture in the paper. He had testified in her courtroom 3 years ago on a federal task force case. His stomach dropped through the floor. "Vance," Miller said, his voice low and strangled. "What do you have here?" "Trespassing at Willow Creek," Vance announced, throwing the paperwork on the high counter. "Refused to identify. Resisting. Disorderly. Real piece of work, these 2. Claimed she was a federal judge." Vance laughed again. Miller didn't laugh. He stood up slowly. He looked at Eleanor. "Ma'am," Miller said, Are you Judge Mathis?" Eleanor looked at the sergeant. "I am U.S. Magistrate Judge Eleanor Mathis. This is my husband, Dr. Marcus Mathis. I was arrested while eating a sandwich. I would like these handcuffs off. Now." The silence that fell over the intake room was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum before an explosion. Officer Vance looked at Sergeant Miller. He looked at Eleanor. The smile faded from his face, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Sarge, you buy that. She's just saying, 'Shut your mouth, Vance,'" Miller roared. The volume of his voice made the young officer jump. "Shut your mouth right now." And Miller came around the desk. He didn't walk, he ran. "Key, give me your key." "Sarge, they were resisting." "Give me the damn key." Miller snatched the key from Vance's hand. He moved behind Eleanor. "Judge Mathis, I don't even know what to say. I am so sorry." He unlocked the cuffs. Eleanor brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bitten into her skin. Miller moved to Marcus and unlocked him immediately. "Doctor, my apologies. Are you injured? Do you need a medic?" "My wife has a shoulder injury," Marcus said, his voice icy. "He assaulted her." Vance was standing by the counter looking like a child who had just realized he had broken the most expensive vase in the house. The reality was crashing down on him. The confidence was draining away, replaced by a cold, sick dread. She didn't show ID," Vance stammered. "She wouldn't show ID." "I tried to show you my credentials," Eleanor said, turning to face him. She wasn't yelling. She was speaking with the absolute finality of a sentencing hearing. "I told you exactly who I was. You told me it was a fake. You told me to shut up. You told me I didn't belong." "Vance." Miller set his face purple with rage. "Go into the conference room. Sit down. Don't touch your radio. Don't touch your phone. Just sit there." "But..." "Go!" Vance retreated, disappearing into the side room. Miller turned back to the couple. "Judge, I am calling the chief right now. He's at a luncheon, but he will be here in 10 minutes. Please come sit in my office. Can I get you water ice for your wrists?" "I want the footage preserved," Eleanor said. "Body cam, dash cam, Sallyport video, everything. And I want to make a formal criminal complaint for assault and false imprisonment." "It's already being pulled, Judge," Miller promised. "Everything is being locked down." 10 minutes later, Chief of Police Robert Danton burst through the doors. He was a man who prided himself on running a clean department, and he looked like he was about to have a stroke. He saw Eleanor Mathis sitting in the sergeant's office, holding an ice pack to her wrist. He knew her. He had attended Rotary Club meetings with her. "Judge Mathis," Danton said, breathless. "Eleanor, I got the call from Miller." "Robert," Eleanor said calmly, "your officer arrested me for being black in a public park." "I know. I saw the preliminary log. There are no words." "There are words, Robert," Eleanor said. "The words are false arrest, assault, and civil rights violation. That young man out there put his hands on me. He twisted my arm behind my back while I was holding a sandwich. He called us you people. He told us we didn't belong." She stood up. "He is a danger to this community." "If he did this to me, Robert, imagine what he has been doing to people who don't have my title. Imagine what he does to the teenagers who can't call the chief of police." The reckoning was swift, brutal, and public. Chief Danton didn't wait for an internal affairs investigation to drag on for months. He reviewed the body camera footage in his office with Eleanor and Marcus present. The video was damning. It showed everything: the aggressive approach, the immediate hostility, the polite legal responses from the couple, the escalation, the assault, the mockery in the car. It was a masterclass in bad policing. Danton walked out of his office and into the conference room where Vance was sitting. The young officer stood up. "Chief, let me explain. They were being difficult." "Badge," Danton said. He held out his hand. "Sir, badge, gun, ID card. Put them on the table." Vance's hands shook. Am I on leave?" "You are suspended without pay pending termination proceedings which I am initiating today," Danton said. "And you are under criminal investigation for assault and deprivation of rights under color of law. You are done, Vance. You are not a police officer anymore. You are a liability." Vance stripped his gear. He placed the badge number 492 on the table. It made a heavy clunk. "Get out of my station," Danton said. As Vance walked out the back door, stripped of his authority, wearing just a t-shirt and uniform pants, he looked small. He passed the window of the sergeant's office. Eleanor Mathis was watching him. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched him with a look of profound disappointment. But the story didn't end there. The footage was released. It had to be. The state's open records laws were clear, and Eleanor Mathis demanded transparency. The video went viral within hours. Judge arrested for picnicking. Officer tells federal magistrate you people. The outrage was volcanic. Protests erupted outside the Oak Ridge Police Department. The FBI Civil Rights Division opened an investigation the next morning. The lawsuit followed. It wasn't just about the arrest. It was about the culture that allowed Vance to stay on the force despite 14 prior complaints. It was about the failure to supervise. Brenda Halloway, the caller, was not spared. While it is rare for 911 callers to face consequences, the audio of her call was released. Her frantic insistence that they don't look like they live here was exposed as purely racial bias. She was sued for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She lost her position as HOA president. She became a pariah in the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. The city settled the civil rights lawsuit for $6.5 million. It was the largest payout in the city's history. But for Eleanor and Marcus Mathis, it wasn't about the money. They donated a significant portion of the settlement to the Legal Aid Society and a scholarship fund for minority law students. Kyle Vance was fired. His certification to be a police officer was permanently revoked by the state board. He would never carry a badge or a gun again. He was charged criminally with misdemeanor assault and official oppression. He pleaded guilty to avoid jail time, receiving 2 years of probation and a permanent criminal record. At 29, he was a felon, unemployable in security or law enforcement, forced to start over with the weight of his disgrace following him everywhere. The Oak Ridge Police Department underwent a DOJ-mandated overhaul. New policies were implemented regarding suspicious person calls, Officers were stripped of the discretion to demand ID without clear articulable criminal suspicion. The residents-only culture of the public parks was dismantled. On the 1-year anniversary of the arrest, Eleanor and Marcus Mathis returned to Willow Creek Park. They went to the same tree. They spread the same blanket. They ate the same lunch. A young officer walked by on foot patrol. He was new hired under the reform standards. He saw them. He didn't stop. He didn't ask for ID. He simply nodded and touched the brim of his cap. "Good afternoon, folks. Beautiful day for it." "Yes, it is," Marcus replied. The officer kept walking. It was a small moment, but a heavy one. It was what justice looked like, not a courtroom victory, but the simple quiet right to exist in a public space without fear. But we must ask ourselves, what if Eleanor hadn't been a judge? What if she had been a school teacher, a nurse, or a janitor? Would the handcuffs have come off so quickly? Would the chief have arrived in 10 minutes? Would the settlement have been millions? Or would they have been processed, charged, and forced to plead out to a disorderly conduct charge just to go home? Eleanor Mathis saved herself because she had the power of the federal government behind her. But the system shouldn't require a federal badge to treat citizens with dignity. This story ended with justice, but only because the victim was powerful enough to demand it. How many Kyle Vances are still out there patrolling your streets? How many Brenda Halloways are watching from their windows? And how many innocent people are sitting in cells right now because they didn't have the title judge to save them? If this story moved you, if you believe that we must demand better from those who hold power, please leave a comment below. Share this video. Let's keep the light on in the dark corners. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and take care of each other.
Stand up and show me your ID. Now.
Am I being detained or is this a consensual encounter, officer?
You're being detained until I figure out who you are.
Then state the crime. Because eating lunch is not one.
The body camera footage that would eventually destroy Officer Kyle Miller's career and cost the city of Charleston nearly $1 million began with 30 seconds of silence. It was a perfect Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the heat of the South gives way to a crisp golden autumn breeze. The camera mounted to the chest of a 29-year-old patrol officer captured the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel as he walked through the manicured paths of Marion Square Park. Officer Miller wasn't responding to a bank robbery. He wasn't chasing a violent fugitive. He was responding to a suspicious person call that had come in from a resident of the luxury condos overlooking the park, a call that described nothing more than a man sitting on a bench. The man in question was Elias Thorne. At 58 years old, Elias was a portrait of dignity. He was wearing a charcoal gray bespoke suit, though he had removed the jacket and folded it neatly next to him on the iron bench. His tie was loosened slightly at the collar, and he was halfway through a turkey sandwich from the deli down the street. Elias wasn't loitering. He was taking his federally mandated lunch break. He had spent the morning reviewing compliance reports for the Department of Justice, and he had chosen this specific bench because it offered a clear view of the old Citadel building. He had a copy of the Wall Street Journal open on his lap, and his reading glasses were perched on the bridge of his nose. To anyone with a shred of common sense, Elias Thorne looked exactly like what he was, a senior professional taking a quiet moment in the middle of a workday. But Officer Kyle Miller didn't see a professional. Miller, who had been on the force for just under 4 years, and was already developing a reputation for being aggressive with quality-of-life enforcement, saw a target. The dispatch call had mentioned a black male approximately 50 to 60 loitering near the fountain. In Miller's mind, the affluent neighborhood surrounding the park didn't match the man on the bench. He had already decided before he even opened his mouth that Elias didn't belong there. Miller approached from the side, his thumbs hooked into his duty belt, his posture stiff and confrontational. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how the day was going. He stopped 3 feet from where Elias was eating and cast a shadow over the newspaper. "Hey, buddy," Miller said. His voice was loud, shattering the peace of the park. "We need to talk." Elias Thorne didn't jump. He didn't scramble to pack up his things. He slowly chewed the bite of sandwich he had just swallowed, and then looked up over the rim of his reading glasses. His eyes were calm, possessing the heavy, settled weight of a man who had seen everything the legal system had to offer. He folded his newspaper deliberately, placing it on his lap. "Good afternoon, officer," Elias said. His voice was a deep baritone, polished and articulate. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Yeah, you can tell me what you're doing here," Miller said, stepping closer. The camera captured the aggression in his stance. He was looming, trying to project dominance. "I am eating my lunch," Elias replied simply. "I assume that is not a violation of city ordinance." "We got a call," Miller said, cutting him off. "Suspicious individual, loitering. People are concerned. You don't live around here, do you?" Elias picked up a napkin and wiped the corner of his mouth. "Officer, I am sitting on a public bench in a public park during daylight hours. I am not soliciting, I am not intoxicated, and I am not disturbing the peace. Whether I live around here is irrelevant to my right to be here." Miller's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to people talking back, especially not with words like irrelevant. He was used to fear. He was used to immediate submission. "I didn't ask for a law lecture. I asked for your ID. Let's see it." Elias sighed, a sound of profound disappointment rather than fear. He turned his body slightly to face the officer fully. "Officer, before we proceed, I need you to answer a question. Am I being detained, or is this a consensual encounter?" The question hung in the air, heavy and precise. Am I being detained? It was the kind of question that rookie officers dreaded and arrogant officers hated. Officer Kyle Miller was firmly in the latter category. He shifted his weight, his hand dropping instinctively to rest near his holster, not drawing but signaling a threat. The body camera audio picked up the rustle of his uniform and the sharp intake of breath. "You're being detained until I figure out who you are and what you're doing," Miller snapped. "Now give me your ID. I'm not going to ask you again." Elias Thorne remained seated. He did not reach for his pocket. He did not reach for the jacket folded beside him. He kept his hands perfectly visible on his knees, palms open. "Officer, for a detention to be lawful under Terry v. Ohio, you must possess reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. A vague report of a suspicious person without specific conduct does not meet that standard. So I will ask you again, what specific crime do you suspect me of committing?" Miller's face flushed a deep red. He looked around the park. A few people were walking their dogs. A nanny was pushing a stroller about 50 yards away. They were starting to look over. Miller felt his authority slipping, and his ego couldn't handle the bruising. "You're failing to identify," Miller said, his voice rising. "That's a crime. In this state, you have to identify yourself when an officer asks." "That is incorrect," Elias said, his tone remaining maddeningly conversational. "This is not a stop and identify state unless I am lawfully arrested or validly detained. Since you have articulated no crime, there is no valid detention. Therefore, I am not obligated to provide identification papers to satisfy your curiosity. I am a citizen eating a sandwich." "Listen to me," Miller growled, stepping into Elias's personal space. "You're acting belligerent. You're obstructing my investigation. That gives me all the cause I need. Stand up." "I am not belligerent," Elias corrected him. "I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. There is a distinct legal difference, officer. I would strongly suggest you consider your next move very carefully. You are on the precipice of a significant mistake." "I don't need advice from a vagrant," Miller spat out the word. He saw the suit, but he didn't see it. He saw a man who refused to bow, and that made him a threat. Last chance. ID. Now. No, Elias said. I do not consent to this search or seizure. If I am not under arrest, I am going to finish my lunch. Miller reached for his radio, clicking the button on his shoulder mic. Dispatch show me with one uncooperative male at Marion Square. Requesting backup. Subject is refusing lawful orders and acting erratic. Elias shook his head slowly. Erratic officer, the camera on your chest is recording everything. It sees me sitting still. It hears me speaking calmly. You are fabricating a narrative in real time. That is known as falsifying a police report. That is a felony. Shut up! Miller yelled. The shout drew the attention of a woman sitting on a bench across the path. She was in her 40s, wearing jogging clothes. She pulled out her phone and held it up, the universal signal that the world was now watching. Miller saw her but ignored her. He was too committed now. He couldn't back down without looking weak in front of the civilians. You want to play lawyer? Miller said, unclipping his handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rattle was distinct and sharp. We can play lawyer at the station. Stand up. Turn around. Elias looked at the officer, his eyes narrowing slightly. He calculated the variables. He could continue to sit, forcing the officer to physically drag him up, which would look worse for the department but risked physical injury. Or he could comply under duress, preserving his dignity and his physical safety while securing the lawsuit. Elias chose the latter. I am complying with your orders only because you are threatening me with physical force, Elias said, his voice projecting clearly for the bystander's phone and the body camera. I am not resisting. I am not consenting. Elias stood up slowly. He towered over Officer Miller by 2 inches. He turned around, placing his hands behind his back, interlacing his fingers. You're making a mistake that you cannot undo, son, Elias said softly. Stop talking, Miller said, grabbing Elias's wrists and slapping the cold steel cuffs onto them. He ratcheted them tighter than necessary. You're under arrest. The sensation of handcuffs was something Elias Thorne had not felt in 40 years, not since a protest in D.C. during his college years. But the cold metal biting into his wrists today felt different. It wasn't the badge of honor of a protest. It was the sharp sting of injustice. Officer Miller shoved him slightly forward, forcing him to spread his feet. What am I being arrested for? Elias asked. He didn't turn his head. He stared straight ahead at the statue in the center of the park. Obstruction of justice, Miller reciting the catch-all charge used by lazy officers everywhere. Disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order. Those are derivative charges, Elias noted. They require an underlying lawful basis. You still haven't named the crime I was committing before you approached me. I said shut up. Miller grabbed Elias by the bicep. He turned to the woman recording them. Back up, ma'am. This is an active crime scene. You interfere, you're next. The woman didn't back up. I'm on public property, officer, she shouted back. He wasn't doing anything. I've been here for 20 minutes. He was just eating. I've got it, ma'am, Elias called out to her, his voice steady. Please keep recording. Do not stop until we leave. My name is Elias Thorne. Miller jerked Elias toward the patrol car parked at the curb. Get moving. As they walked, Elias looked at his jacket and newspaper left on the bench. My personal property, Elias said. You are required to secure it. Miller groaned, annoyed. He dragged Elias over to the bench, snatched up the expensive suit jacket and the newspaper and stuffed them haphazardly under his arm. He then marched Elias to the cruiser. He opened the back door and pushed Elias's head down a rough, unnecessary gesture, guiding him into the cramped plastic seat. The back of a police cruiser is designed to be dehumanizing. The hard plastic seat, the cage separating the front and back, the smell of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. Elias sat awkwardly, his hands pinned behind his back, straining his shoulders. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He needed to be sharp. Miller got into the driver's seat. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline of the confrontation still pumping through him. He typed something into his computer terminal. He didn't look back at his prisoner. He was already rehearsing his story for the sergeant. Subject was hostile, refused to identify. Aggressive movements. I feared for my safety. "Officer Miller," Elias said from the back seat. "I want you to note the time. It is 1:14 p.m. You have officially deprived a citizen of their liberty without probable cause. Every minute that passes from this moment forward increases the liability for your department." Miller slammed his hand on the steering wheel. "You know, usually people shut up when they get the bracelets on. You just don't know when to quit. You think you're the first guy to threaten me with a lawsuit. I got a union rep who eats guys like you for breakfast." "I assure you," Elias said dryly, "he has never eaten anyone like me." Miller started the engine and pulled away from the curb lights, flashing unnecessarily as he merged into traffic. The ride to the precinct was short, maybe 10 minutes. Miller turned up the radio, blasting talk radio to drown out any further comments from the back seat. Elias sat in silence, watching the city pass by. He saw the courthouse where he had argued cases. He saw the federal building where his office was located on the top floor. They arrived at the central precinct. Miller pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage door rattling shut behind them. He hauled Elias out of the car. "Let's go," Miller said. "Processing. Then you can sit in a cell until you decide to tell us who you are." "My identification is in my jacket pocket," Elias said as they walked through the secure doors into the booking area. "The jacket you crumpled into the front seat." Miller ignored him and pushed him toward the booking desk. The room was bright fluorescent and loud. Phones were ringing. Other officers were chatting. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Tom Reynolds. Reynolds was 55, a 30-year veteran with gray hair and a tired face. He had seen it all. He looked up as Miller approached with Elias in tow. Reynolds looked at Elias, the suit, the posture, the calm expression, and then he looked at Miller. Reynolds frowned. He knew a dirtbag when he saw one, and he knew a solid citizen when he saw one. Elias Thorne looked like the kind of man who played golf with the mayor. "What do we have here, Miller?" Reynolds asked, his voice weary. "Refusal to identify obstruction disorderly," Miller said, puffing out his chest. "Guy wouldn't give me ID in the park. Started making a scene, gathering a crowd." Reynolds looked at Elias. "That true, sir?" "The officer approached me while I was eating lunch," Elias said. "He had no reasonable suspicion. I asserted my rights. He arrested me." Reynolds sighed. He looked at Miller. "Did you search him?" "Pat down only. His wallet is in his jacket," Miller said, dropping the suit jacket onto the counter. "Uncuff him so we can print him," Reynolds said. Miller removed the cuffs. Elias rubbed his wrists. There were red marks where the metal had dug in. "Empty your pockets, sir," Reynolds said respectfully. "We need to inventory your property." Elias reached for the jacket on the counter. He reached into the inside breast pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He placed it on the counter. "My identification is inside," Elias said, "along with my credentials." Reynolds picked up the wallet. He flipped it open. The booking room was noisy, a cacophony of ringing telephones, squawking radios, and the low murmur of officers processing arrests. But the moment Sergeant Tom Reynolds opened the leather wallet, a strange bubble of silence seemed to form around the booking desk. Reynolds stared at the credentials. He blinked, thinking perhaps his reading glasses were dirty. He leaned in closer. On the left side of the wallet was a heavy metallic badge, gold and blue. On the right was a laminated ID card with a holographic seal. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Elias J. Thorne, Senior Federal Monitor. Reynolds felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. He knew what a federal monitor was. Everyone in law enforcement knew. These were the people sent by Washington when a police department was so corrupt, so broken, or so incompetent that the federal government had to step in and take over. They were the auditors, the hunters, the ones who had the power to fire chiefs and dissolve units. And Officer Kyle Miller, the department's loose cannon, had just arrested one for eating a sandwich. Reynolds looked up slowly. His face had drained of color. He looked at Elias Thorne, who was standing quietly rubbing his wrist waiting. "Officer Miller," Reynolds said. His voice was very quiet, but it had an edge that cut through the room noise. "Yeah, Sarge." Miller was filling out paperwork, oblivious. "Come here. Just a sec, gotta finish the probable cause statement. Put the pen down and come here, now." Miller looked up, startled by the tone. He walked over to the desk. "What's up?" "He got a warrant." Reynolds didn't answer. He simply turned the wallet around and pushed it across the counter toward Miller. "Read that. Read it out loud." Miller looked down. He squinted. "United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." Miller stopped. He looked up at Elias, then back at the ID. "Senior Federal Monitor." Miller scoffed a nervous, incredulous sound. "This is fake. Gotta be. You can buy these online. This guy's a sovereign citizen or something." Elias spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Officer Miller, if you believe that credential is fraudulent, I encourage you to add impersonating a federal officer to my charges. That is a federal felony. Please call the FBI field office. The number is on the back of the card. Ask for Special Agent in Charge Henderson. Tell him you have Elias Thorne in custody." Miller looked at Elias. The confidence was gone, replaced by a creeping dread. Reynolds snatched the wallet back. He looked at Elias. "Sir, you work for the DOJ. I am currently the lead monitor for the consent decree in the neighboring county," Elias said calmly. "And I was in town meeting with your district attorney regarding a separate civil rights inquiry. I decided to take a lunch break." Reynolds closed his eyes for a brief second. "Miller, take the handcuffs off." "Oh, wait, they are off. Don't touch him again." "Sarge, he refused to ID." Miller protested, his voice cracking. "Even if he's a Fed, he has to follow the law." "He knows the law better than you do, you idiot," Reynolds snapped, losing his composure. "You arrested a federal civil rights monitor for loitering. Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I want to speak to your watch commander," Elias said, "and I want the chief of police notified immediately." "Sir, we can clear this up," Reynolds said, his hands shaking slightly as he held the wallet. "It's a misunderstanding. We can release you right now. No record." "No," Elias said firmly. "I have been arrested. I have been transported. I have been booked. The seizure has occurred. You cannot unarrest me to save face. I want the watch commander, and I want my phone call." Reynolds looked at the other officers in the room. They had all stopped working. They were staring. They realized the ship was sinking, and they were all on board. "Miller," Reynolds hissed. "Go to the break room. Sit down. Don't talk to anyone. Don't text anyone. Just sit there." "But Sarge..." "Go!" Miller slinked away, looking like a scolded child, but there was still defiance in his eyes. He didn't think he was wrong. He just thought he was unlucky. Reynolds picked up the phone. He dialed the lieutenant's extension. "LT, it's Reynolds. You need to come down to booking. Now. No, listen to me. Miller arrested a guy. It's bad. It's the DOJ, sir. The guy is a federal monitor. Yes, he's standing right here." Elias watched the sergeant panic. He felt no satisfaction, only a weary resolve. This was the system he had spent 30 years fighting. It wasn't just Miller. It was the sergeant trying to cover it up. It was the culture that allowed Miller to exist. "Sir," Reynolds said, hanging up the phone. "Lieutenant Creates is coming down. Can I Can I get you some water? Coffee? A chair? I would like a chair, Elias said. And I would like you to ensure that the body camera footage from Officer Miller's camera is uploaded and locked immediately. If 20 seconds of that footage goes missing, Sergeant, I will ensure that you are named personally in the federal lawsuit. It won't go missing, sir, Reynolds promised, pale-faced. I'm locking it now. Elias sat on the metal stool provided. He crossed his legs. He waited. The machinery of the department was about to grind to a halt, all because of a sandwich and an ego. Within 20 minutes, the atmosphere in the central precinct had shifted from a typical Tuesday afternoon to something resembling a bomb threat response. The booking area had been cleared of other arrestees. Elias Thorne sat alone on a bench, his jacket folded neatly beside him, again, reading a copy of the local newspaper that someone had hurriedly provided. Lieutenant Marcus Freeman was the first to arrive. He was a sharp man, usually calm, but he burst through the doors with his tie flying over his shoulder. He took one look at Elias, recognized him from a news segment he'd seen months ago, and felt his stomach drop. Freeman walked over to Sergeant Reynolds, who whispered the details. Freeman rubbed his temples, then he approached Elias. Mr. Thorne, I'm Lieutenant Freeman. I am the watch commander. Elias didn't stand. He looked up. Lieutenant, sir, I've reviewed the preliminary report from Officer Miller. I've also spoken to the chief's office. We want to apologize for the inconvenience. We're going to process your release immediately. We'll expunge the arrest record by the end of the day. Expunge. Elias raised an eyebrow. Lieutenant, you are moving too fast. Expungement implies that the arrest happened, and we are scrubbing it. I am concerned with why it happened. Have you watched the footage? Not yet, sir. It's downloading now. Watch it, Elias said. Don't speak to me again until you have watched it. You need to understand what you are defending. Freeman hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. He went into the sergeant's office. 10 minutes later, the doors opened again. This time it was Chief of Police Robert Harrison. Harrison was a politician in a uniform, silver hair, bright teeth, firm handshake. But today the smile was gone. He had received the call while at a Rotary Club luncheon. Harrison walked straight to Elias. Mr. Thorne, my God, I don't know what to say. Elias stood up this time. He and Harrison had met once briefly at a gala. Chief Harrison, Elias, please. This is a catastrophe, Harrison said, his voice lowered. I have Officer Miller in the captain's office. He's being pulled off the street immediately. Please come to my office. Let's get you out of this holding area. I am fine here, Chief, Elias said. I want to follow the procedure. I was arrested. I should be processed out like anyone else. Elias, don't do this to us, Harrison pleaded slightly. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake, but we can fix this. Can you? Elias asked. Chief Officer Miller arrested me because I wouldn't show him ID while eating a sandwich. He fabricated charges of obstruction. He escalated a consensual encounter into a Fourth Amendment violation in under 60 seconds. And when I told him who I was, he didn't stop. He laughed. Lieutenant Freeman stepped out of the office. He looked sick. He walked up to the chief and whispered in his ear. The video. It's bad, Chief. Real bad. No probable cause. Miller was aggressive. Thorne was perfect. Harrison closed his eyes. He knew what this meant. Where is Officer Miller now? Elias asked. He's being questioned by Internal Affairs, Freeman said. Good, Elias said. I have not been read my Miranda rights, so I assume you are not interrogating me. I am free to go. Of course, Harrison said. You've been free to go for 30 minutes. Then I have some requests, Elias said. His voice hardened. The pleasantries were over. I want digital copies of the incident report, the booking sheet, and the CAD logs from dispatch. I want them provided to me before I leave this building. We can't release evidence that quickly, Freeman started. You can, Elias interrupted. And you will, because if I have to subpoena them, I will also subpoena 5 years of Officer Miller's stop and frisk data. And I suspect, gentlemen, that I am not the first black man he has stopped in Marion Square. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison looked at Freeman. They both knew the answer. Miller had numbers, high numbers. They had ignored it because he was proactive. We'll get you the copies, Harrison said quietly. And one more thing, Elias said. I want my suit jacket cleaned. Miller threw it on the floor of his cruiser. We'll pay for it, Harrison said. We'll replace it. It's not about the money, Chief, Elias said, picking up his jacket and dusting off a speck of lint. It's about the respect. Elias looked toward the back hallway where the holding cells were. And tell Officer Miller that the fake badge he laughed at, it has more power than he will ever understand. Elias Thorne walked out of the central precinct at 3:45 p.m. The sun was still shining, but the day felt different now. Chief Harrison had offered his personal driver to take Elias home. Elias had declined. He had called an Uber. He wanted to stand on the sidewalk, a free man, and wait like anyone else. As he waited, his phone buzzed. It was his assistant. Elias, are you okay? You missed the 2:00 p.m. call with the mayor's office. I was indisposed, Elias said calmly. I'll explain later. Draft a litigation hold letter. Address it to the city attorney of Charleston. I want it sent by courier before close of business today. A litigation hold. For what case? Target is the Charleston Police Department. Specific focus on Officer Kyle Miller. Preservation of all electronic data, body cams, dash cams, emails, and disciplinary records. There was a pause on the other end. Elias, did something happen? Yes, Elias said, watching a black SUV pull up. I went to the park. Back inside the station, the fallout was nuclear. Officer Kyle Miller was sitting in an interrogation room stripped of his gun and badge. He was still trying to argue. He didn't listen, Miller shouted at the internal affairs investigator. He was arrogant. You can't just let people walk all over you. Miller, shut up, the investigator said, rubbing his eyes. Do you know what qualified immunity is? Yeah, it protects me. Not when you knowingly violate a clearly established constitutional right, the investigator said. You demanded ID without reasonable suspicion. Brown visa Texas, Hebel, basic academy stuff, and you did it to a federal monitor. There is no immunity for this. You are on your own. Miller slumped in his chair. The reality was finally starting to crack through his armor of entitlement. In the chief's office, Harrison was on the phone with the city attorney. How bad is it? The attorney asked. It's the worst-case scenario, Harrison said, looking out his window. We have it on video. Miller looks like a bully. Thorne looks like... well, he looks like a federal judge. And there were witnesses. A woman filmed it. Is it on social media yet? I don't know. Check, now. It was. The woman who had filmed the arrest had uploaded it to Twitter 30 minutes ago. It already had 40,000 views. The caption read, Charleston PD arrests elderly man for eating while black. Officer wouldn't listen. Harrison watched the view count tick up 41,000, 45,000, 50,000. We need to settle, Harrison said into the phone. We need to settle this fast, whatever he wants. He's a federal monitor, Bob, the city attorney said, his voice hollow. He doesn't want money. He wants blood. He wants policy changes. He wants your badge. The lawsuit, Thorne v. City of Charleston, was filed 48 hours later. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, concise, brutal, and irrefutable. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, false imprisonment, and battery. But the most damaging part was the section on pattern and practice. Elias hadn't just sued for himself. He had used his resources to pull Officer Miller's history. The data was damning. Over 3 years, Miller had conducted 400 suspicious person stops. 85% of them were black men. Only 2% resulted in a citation for an actual crime. The rest were release without charge after running ID. It was a harassment campaign disguised as policing. The media storm was intense. The video of Elias' dignified, calm citing case law while Miller screamed at him played on every national news network. It was the perfect contrast. The unruly, unprofessional cop versus the composed, educated citizen. The internal affairs investigation was concluded in record time. Usually these things took months. This took 2 weeks. The findings were sustained on all counts. Miller had violated department policy, state law, and the U.S. Constitution. But Elias didn't stop with Miller. He went after the supervisors. He deposed Sergeant Reynolds. "Why did you allow the arrest to proceed when the officer could not articulate a crime?" Elias asked during the deposition. I assumed he had cause," Reynolds stammered. "Assumption is not probable cause, Sergeant," Elias replied. "You are the gatekeeper. You failed." The city attorney called Elias's lawyer, an old friend from law school, to discuss a settlement. "We're offering $250,000, the city attorney said, "and Miller is already suspended pending termination." "We're not interested in the money," Elias's lawyer said. "Elias wants $750,000, and he wants a consent decree." "A consent decree, you can't demand that in a settlement." "Then we go to trial," the lawyer said. "And Elias will put the chief on the stand. He will put the mayor on the stand. He will expose the fact that you knew about Miller's numbers and did nothing. Do you want that in an election year?" The city attorney folded. They settled for $850,000. But the non-monetary terms were the real victory. The department agreed to an independent audit of all stop and identify encounters for the next 5 years. They agreed to mandatory constitutional law training for all officers, not just academy recruits. And they agreed to a zero-tolerance policy for officers who failed to activate body cameras. Officer Kyle Miller was terminated on a Friday. He tried to appeal through the union, but the union refused to back him. The video was too embarrassing. The union president told him, "You picked a fight with the wrong guy, Kyle. You're done." Miller lost his job, his pension, and his certification. In South Carolina, once decertified for cause you cannot work as a police officer again. At 29, his career in law enforcement was over. 6 months later, Elias Thorne sat on the same bench in Marion Square. It was spring now. The azaleas were in bloom, bursting with pink and white flowers. He had his jacket folded next to him. He was eating a turkey sandwich. He watched a pair of police officers walking the beat. They were young, diverse, one white female, one black male. They walked past a group of teenagers playing music, a little too loud. Elias watched closely. The old way would have been to storm and demand ID and assert dominance. Instead, the female officer waved. "Afternoon, guys. Keep the volume down a bit, okay? People are reading." "Sure thing, officer," one of the kids said, turning the speaker down. The officers kept walking. They saw Elias. They nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." "Good afternoon," Elias replied. It was a small change, a tiny shift in the universe. But it was there. Elias had donated the entire $850,000 settlement. Half went to the local public defender's office to hire 2 new attorneys dedicated to misdemeanor defense. The other half went to a scholarship fund for children of incarcerated parents. He didn't keep a dime. The Department of Justice had officially opened a larger probe into the department triggered by the data Elias had uncovered. Ironically, Elias had to recuse himself from the oversight team to avoid a conflict of interest. He didn't mind. He had done his part. But as he sat there enjoying the peace, Elias felt a lingering sadness. He thought about Officer Miller. He didn't hate the young man. He pitied him. Miller was a product of a system that taught him that a badge meant he was a king and that citizens were subjects. Miller had destroyed his own life because he couldn't handle a simple no. And Elias thought about the men who weren't federal monitors, the men who didn't have law degrees, the men who didn't have the right kind of ID in their wallets. What happened to them? When they were stopped in this park and they asserted their rights and they were handcuffed, they didn't get an apology from the chief. They got a criminal record. They lost their jobs. They lost their dignity. Elias had won because he was Elias Thorne. But the victory felt hollow because it shouldn't have required a federal badge to be treated like a human being. The Constitution applies to the janitor just as much as it applies to the judge. Or at least it's supposed to. He finished his sandwich, wiped his mouth, and stood up. He put on his jacket, smoothing the lapels. He looked at the empty bench. It was just a piece of wood and iron. But it was also a battleground. Elias picked up his briefcase and began the walk back to his office. He had work to do. As long as there were officers like Miller, and as long as there were systems that protected them, his lunch breaks would never truly be peaceful. Thank you for reading this story. It's a stark reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny, and that knowing your rights is your first line of defense. Here is a question for you. If Elias hadn't been a federal official, do you think the department would have ever admitted they were wrong? Or would he just be another statistic? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please subscribe if you believe in justice and accountability. See you in the next story.